What if you awoke not in your comfortable bed, but in the filthy mud of a medieval alley, your body aching from endless hunger and back-breaking toil, where every scrap of food is a battle won against starvation, disease, and the iron grip of feudal lords? In this episode of Surviving the Feudal Age, step into the boots of a destitute refuse collector in 12th century London, a world of rotting streets, ruthless rivals, and unrelenting hardship that tests the very limits of human endurance. Close your eyes, let the immersive whispers of history guide you, and drift into sleep as you navigate a day where survival hangs by a thread, but dignity endures. Relax, breathe deep, and let the story begin. You awaken at dawn in a muddy alley of medieval London, the damp chill seeping through your threadbare cloak like icy fingers clutching at your bones. The distant tolling of church bells from St. Paul's Cathedral pierces the foggy air, signaling the start of another grueling day in this unforgiving city under King Henry II's rule. Your body aches from the hard ground where you've slept, curled against a timber wall slick with moss and grime, the remnants of last night's rain pooling around you in foul puddles that reek of urine and decay. Hunger gnaws at your insides like a relentless rat, a constant companion in your life as a destitute beggar, where every morsel must be scavenged or begged for amidst the teeming masses of the feudal world. You rise slowly, joints protesting with sharp pains from years of exposure and malnutrition, your skin rough and scarred from old wounds that never fully heal without proper care or poultices from an apothecary you can't afford. The narrow alley, hemmed in by overhanging half-timbered houses, leaning precariously like drunken giants, echoes with the first stirrings of the city. Cocks crow, shutters creak open, and the muffled curses of early risers fill the air. You wrap your tattered woolen cloak tighter, its once coarse fabric now worn thin and infested with lice that itch incessantly, a reminder of the vermin that thrive in the squalor of London's underbelly during this era of the High Middle Ages. Your bare feet sink into the cold mud, mixed with horse dung and discarded refuse, as you step out, avoiding the sharper stones that could lacerate your soles and invite the deadly infections so common among the poor. The air is thick with the smells of wood smoke from hearth fires and the underlying rot of the streets, where open gutters carry waste toward the Thames. You whisper a fervent prayer to St. Christopher, the patron of travelers and the destitute, beseeching protection from the perils ahead. Thieves lurk in shadows, beadles carry clubs enforcing the king's peace, and the ever-present threat of famine grips the land after poor harvests. As a serf who fled your lord's manor years ago, you're an outlaw in the eyes of the feudal system, surviving on the fringes without the dubious security of bonded labor. You face the brutality of urban poverty, where one misstep could mean starvation or the gallows. Yet, in this harsh existence, you cling to a shred of dignity, straightening your posture as you emerge into the widening street, determined to face the day. The first light filters through the mist, casting a pale glow on the thatched roofs and wooden signs of nearby taverns, where the wealthy might soon gather for ale and bread you can only dream of. You scan the alley's end for any overlooked scraps. A bone from a butcher's discard, or a crust tossed aside, might sustain you, your eyes sharp from necessity, knowing that survival demands constant vigilance in this world of rigid hierarchies and unrelenting hardship. The city's rhythm builds slowly, with carts rumbling over the uneven paths, carrying goods for the markets, and you move with purpose, driven by the primal urge to endure another day in the shadow of the Plantagenet throne. You trudge toward the bustling marketplace near London Bridge, your worn shoes squelching in the filth-strewn paths that wind through the crowded wards of the city. Your shoes, are little more than leather scraps bound with twine, and the press of bodies and clamour of vendors already swell as the sun climbs higher in the grey sky of 12th century England. Each step sends jolts of pain through your blistered feet, a testament to the miles you've wandered in search of sustenance, your legs weakened by the meagre diet of roots and occasional alms that barely staves off the wasting diseases rampant among the poor. The streets are a labyrinth of mud and excrement, where pigs root freely and children play in the gutters, oblivious to the cholera and fluxes that claim lives without mercy in this pre-plague era. Whispers of distant pestilences from the Crusades haunt the air. You navigate carefully, dodging the splatter from passing horses ridden by knights or merchants, their fine cloaks a stark contrast to your rags. This symbolizes the vast chasm of the feudal order, where you, as a landless vagrant, occupy the lowest rung, subject to the whims of lords and the church's tithes you can't pay. The scent of the Thames grows stronger, a murky brew of fish, sewage and tar from the boats, mingling with the acrid smoke from blacksmith forges that clang rhythmically, forging tools and weapons for the king's endless wars. You whisper another prayer to St. Christopher, clutching a small wooden cross carved from scavenged driftwood, seeking divine favour in a world where the church's bells dictate the hours. From matins at dawn to compline at dusk, heresy or vagrancy could lead to brutal punishments like flogging or branding. Hunger twists your gut sharper now, a brutal reminder that without food, your body will falter, perhaps succumbing to the cold agues that fell so many last winter. You scan the ground for any windfall, an apple core or cheese rind discarded by the affluent, your senses heightened by desperation, ears attuned to the haggling voices ahead. As you approach the bridge, its wooden structure groaning under the weight of traffic, you spot the toll booths where guards eye wanderers like you suspiciously, ready to demand pennies you don't have or chase you off with staves. The marketplace unfolds before you, a chaotic tapestry of stalls selling wool, spices from afar, and salted herring, where the cries of sellers pierce the air like arrows. You position yourself on the fringes, away from the guild enforcers who protect their members' trades, knowing that begging here risks arrest by the beadles, who patrol with iron-shod clubs, enforcing the assizes that keep the destitute in check. Yet survival demands boldness. You extend your hand tentatively, voice hoarse from disuse, pleading for charity in the name of Christ, while inwardly steeling against the inevitable rejections and insults that erode your spirit. A small act of resilience flickers as you recall a tale from a fellow beggar, of a kind soul who once gave enough for a full loaf, fueling hope amid the brutality. The crowd surges around you, a sea of hoods and tunics, and you brace for the day's trials, the weight of feudal oppression pressing down like the overcast sky. You notice a rival beggar approaching your favoured spot near the fountain in Cheapside, his gaunt frame and tattered hood casting a shadow over the cobbles as he eyes you with a mix of envy and aggression. This prompts a wary exchange where you defend your territory with hushed threats growled through gritted teeth, all while keeping a vigilant watch for the approaching beadles who patrol the streets with their heavy staves to enforce the king's order in this brutal society. The air thickens with tension, the scent of wet stone from the fountain mingling with the man's unwashed odour, a reminder of the shared squalor that breeds such desperate rivalries among the destitute. In this world, a prime begging location can mean the difference between a scrap of food and utter starvation. Your heart pounds subtly, not from fear, but from the primal instinct honed by years on the margins, where violence erupts swiftly over trifles in 12th century London. The city is governed by Henry II's assizes that punish vagrants harshly, perhaps with a public whipping or time in the pillory for disturbances. You stand your ground, voice low and steady, invoking the unwritten code of the streets. This patch is mine by dawn's claim. Seek elsewhere, lest we both draw the watch's ire. Your words are laced with the exhaustion of constant conflict, your calloused hands clenching subtly, ready to fend off a shove if needed. He hesitates, his eyes darting to your scarred knuckles from past scuffles, the marks of survival in a world where the weak are trampled underfoot by the armored knights or opportunistic thieves who prey on the vulnerable. The marketplace hums around you, oblivious. Spice merchants haggle over pepper at exorbitant prices. Apprentices scurry with bundles of wool. But for you, this confrontation is a microcosm of feudal brutality, where even the lowest compete fiercely for crumbs from the tables of lords and guildsmen. Beadles appear in the distance, their hooded cloaks and badges of office glinting in the morning light, clubs swinging idly as they scan for troublemakers. They enforce curfews and labor laws that could see you pressed into chain gangs for the city's walls if caught idling. You feel the chill of potential arrest, a fate that might lead to the dank cells of Newgate, where disease festers and executions are public spectacles to deter the masses. Yet, you maintain composure, a small act of dignity amid degradation, as he backs away with a muttered curse, slinking into the crowd. The fountain's trickle resumes its soothing rhythm in your ears, a brief respite, but hunger sharpens again, urging you onward. You adjust your cloak, lice biting at your neck, and resume your pleas, the encounter a stark reminder that survival here is a knife's edge, balanced between human mercy and the unforgiving hammer of medieval justice. You settle near a fountain in the Cheapside district, the cool spray misting your face as you hold out your calloused hand to merchants and townsfolk hurrying by. You endure their scornful looks and muttered insults that sting like lashes, while the morning mist lifts to reveal the tantalizing aroma of baking loaves from nearby stalls that taunt your empty stomach in this harsh medieval reality. The fountain's water gurgles softly, a rare clean source in a city where most drink from polluted wells. But you dare not sip without permission, lest you invite accusations of theft from the watchful water-bearers guild. Your back leans against the stone basin, worn smooth by centuries but cold against your thin frame, amplifying the chills from your damp clothing in the crisp air of early autumn under the Plantagenet rain. Passers-by in their woolen kirtles and hoods glance down at you with mixtures of pity and disdain, embodying the rigid social strata where beggars like you are seen as burdens, potential thieves or divine tests of charity, yet rarely aided beyond a pittance. The marketplace buzzes with activity. Fishmongers shout prices for eels at 2 pennies a pound. Cloth sellers display dyed fabrics from Flemish weavers, and the distant lowing of cattle driven to slaughter creates a sensory overload that you navigate with weary familiarity. Hunger claws deeper, your vision blurring slightly from weakness, a survival threat in a world where the weak are preyed upon by cut purses or pressed into forced labor by sheriffs. Here, in Henry II's time, common law demands you not idle, pushing you toward the grim work of refuse collection to avoid the stocks, though the statute of laborers is a later edict. You murmur pleas in Anglo-Norman mixed with English, for the love of God, a crumb for a poor soul, your voice cracking from thirst. A wealthy merchant tosses a farthing into your palm, worth a quarter penny, a meager coin that might buy a sip of weak ale but little more in this economy of silver pennies and barter. The metal feels cold and heavy, a brief spark of hope amid the brutality, but you clutch it tightly, aware of envious eyes from other beggars who might rob you in the alleys later. Scents of spices like cinnamon from the east waft over, luxuries for the elite, contrasting your last meal of scavenged oat husks that barely sustained you. A child runs by, kicking up mud that splatters your legs, and you flinch, mindful of the boils and sores that afflict the unclean, with no access to barber surgeons or herbalists. Yet, in this moment of quiet desperation, you find a sliver of dignity, lifting your chin to meet gazes, remembering your ancestors' tales of freer times before the Norman yoke tightened the feudal bonds. The sun warms slightly, casting shadows from the timber-framed shops, and you shift position, preparing for the long hours ahead. The fountain's rhythm, a soothing counterpoint to the inner turmoil of barely surviving in London's unforgiving streets. You accept a hardened heel of bread from a compassionate baker's wife who pauses amid her bustling stall, her flour-dusted apron and kind eyes offering a rare glimmer of humanity in the harsh throng of Cheapside. You chew its tough crust slowly in a shadowed nook behind a timbered shop, the faint yeasty taste providing brief relief from the gnawing hunger that has plagued you since last eve, when your stomach twisted empty under the cold stars of medieval London. The bread, stale from yesterday's bake, crumbles dryly in your mouth, each bite a laborious effort with your worn teeth, some loosened by years of poor nourishment and the occasional blow from rough encounters. Yet it fills a void that could otherwise lead to the debilitating weakness that claims so many beggars in this era of intermittent famines under Henry II's reign. You huddle in the nook, the rough wooden wall scraping your back through your rags, shielding you from the prying eyes of the crowd, while the sounds of the market filter in. Hawkers cry, "Hot pies, 2 pence each," and the clang of a cooper's hammer shapes barrels, reminders of the abundance denied to you by the feudal chains that bind serfs to lords and vagrants to the streets. The woman's act of charity, perhaps inspired by the Church's teachings on almsgiving to avoid purgatory's fires, stirs a fleeting warmth in your chest. This is a counterpoint to the brutality where most passers-by avert their gaze or spit disdain, viewing you as a blight on the city's prosperity built on wool trade and royal charters. Your fingers, blackened with grime, tear the bread carefully, savoring every morsel to stretch it out, aware that overeating on an empty stomach could bring cramps or worse in your malnourished state, where scurvy and flux lurk from vitamin-scarce diets. The shadow provides cool respite from the warming sun, but it also hides dangers. Rats scurry nearby, carriers of the fevers that swept through after the Crusades, though the Black Death is yet to come. For now, it's the everyday plagues like dysentery from tainted water that threaten. You whisper a silent blessing to Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, patroness of the poor, grateful for this sustenance that might fuel you through the day's toils, yet mindful that such kindness is rare in a society stratified by birthright. Peasants toil under manorial obligations, and you, a runaway serf, face the gallows if recaptured by your lord's bailiff. The bread's texture grounds you, rough like the cobbles underfoot, and as you swallow the last bit, energy trickles back, staving off the dizziness that signals collapse. Emerging slightly from the nook, you scan the crowd anew, the encounter bolstering your resolve to endure, even as the weight of survival presses on, disease, theft, and the ever-present spectre of winter's bite in this unforgiving Plantagenet world. You overhear whispers among the destitute clustered near a market cross in Cheapside, their ragged forms huddling like spectres as they murmur about refuse collection work available today from the city's sanitation efforts. This draws you toward the guild overseer stationed near the imposing Ludgate, one of London's ancient Roman walls rebuilt in stone, where the stench of accumulated waste already hangs heavy in the air like a suffocating fog over the medieval streets. The whispers carry on the breeze, laced with desperation. A penny for a full cart's haul, but mind the filth's bite, echoing your own dire need for coin in this brutal existence. Refusing such grim labor might mean no shelter from tonight's chill, or the vulnerability to robbers who target the weak. You weave through the throng, your steps heavy on the uneven ground littered with vegetable peels and animal bones, the press of bodies amplifying the odors of sweat and unwashed wool in the warming midday under Henry II's England. This is a time when urban growth outpaces the primitive waste systems, leading to overflowing middens that breed cholera and rats as large as cats. The destitute group disperses as you approach, their eyes hollow from hunger, a mirror to your own gaunt reflection in puddles, where survival demands seizing any opportunity, no matter how degrading, in a feudal system that offers no poor relief beyond sporadic church doles. Reaching the overseer, a burly man in a leather apron marked by guild insignia, you feel the weight of his scrutinizing gaze, knowing he hires only the able-bodied to avoid delays in clearing the streets, as mandated by royal edicts to prevent pestilence in the crowded wards. The area near Ludgate buzzes with carts and guards, the gate's towers looming as symbols of the city's defences against Welsh rebels or internal unrest. But for you, it's a gateway to toil that could earn a few farthings. This might be enough for a bowl of pottage perhaps, but at the risk of injury from sharp debris or the lung-searing fumes of decay. You plead your case hoarsely. Strong enough for the hall master, I've the back for it, your voice competing with the creak of wagons and distant church bells tolling sext, marking the noon prayer hour when devout folk pause. Though beggars like you pray ceaselessly for mercy from a God who seems distant in this harsh world, the stench intensifies here, a vile mix of rotting fish from the nearby Billingsgate and human waste dumped from chamber pots, making your eyes water and stomach churn. This is a harbinger of the labour ahead, where exposure could invite the agues that fell your kin last season. Yet, dignity flickers as you stand tall, refusing to grovel excessively, aware that acceptance means descending into the underbelly of survival, hauling refuse to the Thames's dumps where drownings occur from slippery banks. The overseer nods curtly, tossing you a rough sack for collection, and you brace for the ordeal. The whispers promise now a grim reality in the unrelenting fight to live another day. You plead with the overseer for a day's labour hauling trash near Ludgate, his stern face framed by a hooded cowl as he stands amid towering piles of rotting refuse that swarm with buzzing flies and emit a nauseating stench of decay. You sense the grime-coated tools waiting nearby, a rusted shovel and splintered rake, as you haggle desperately for a few pennies in this degrading opportunity that could mean the difference between eating tonight or succumbing to the starvation that stalks the destitute in 12th century London's unforgiving streets. Your voice trembles slightly from exhaustion. I'll work hard, master, no slacking for a fair wage, as you eye the silver pennies in his pouch, knowing that in Henry II's England, such men hold power over the desperate, often short-changing them under the guise of guild regulations that favour the employed over vagrants like you. The flies land on your sweat-dampened skin, their incessant hum amplifying the humiliation, a brutal reminder of your lowly status in the feudal hierarchy where serfs are bound to lords. Runaways like you scrape by on the edges, vulnerable to recapture, and the manorial court's harsh penalties, like mutilation or hanging for desertion. The refuse heaps loom, a chaotic mound of spoiled cabbages oozing slime, shattered ale pots sharp enough to gash unwary hands, and animal entrails crawling with maggots. The textures are slick and repulsive underfoot as you shift nervously, the ground squelching with leaked fluids that could harbour the fluxes, causing bloody stools and death without herbal remedies you can't afford. Church bells toll nones in the distance, marking the afternoon prayer. But for you, devotion is secondary to survival in a world where the church demands tithes even from the poor, leaving little for alms. The overseer's breath reeks of ale as he grunts agreement. tossing you the tools with a dismissive wave, the wooden handles rough and embedded with dirt that grates your palms, already calloused from past labors but prone to blisters that fester in this unsanitary era before antiseptics. You feel a mix of relief and dread. Relief at the promise of coin, dread at the physical toll, knowing that overexertion could lead to collapse or injury, with no barber surgeon to set bones or leech fevers for the penniless. Buzzing intensifies as you approach the pile, the air thick and choking, making your eyes water and throat burn, a sensory assault that tests your resolve in this barely survivable existence. Yet a spark of dignity persists. You grip the shovel firmly, refusing to show weakness, aware that refusal means begging through the day with an empty belly, exposed to the beadles' clubs or rival thieves. The marketplace's din fades slightly here on the periphery, replaced by the scuttle of rats feasting on the waste, harbingers of the diseases that decimate the underclass. As you await his final nod, you brace inwardly. The haggling won, but the true battle ahead in the grueling hall that embodies the harshness of medieval poverty. You begin your toil by loading a creaking cart with street debris near Ludgate, the wooden vehicle groaning under the weight as you shovel spoiled food, rotting apples soft and mushy to the touch, broken pottery shards that slice at your fingers if not handled carefully, and animal droppings warm and sticky from recent passage. The coarse textures scrape your hands raw as you navigate the narrow, crowded lanes of medieval London, where the press of humanity makes every movement a risk in this era of unrelenting hardship under Henry II's rule. Sweat beads on your forehead almost immediately, trickling down to sting your eyes amid the rising sun's warmth, your threadbare tunic clinging damply to your back, infested with fleas that bite incessantly. This compounds the misery of labor in a time when hygiene is a luxury for the elite, and the poor endure constant infestation leading to scratching sores and secondary infections. The cart's wheels sink into the muddy ruts, requiring you to heave with all your strength, muscles straining from malnutrition, each scoop of refuse a laborious effort that sends jolts through your aching arms. This reminds you of the feudal obligations you fled, ploughing fields from dawn to dusk, now replaced by this urban drudgery that pays in pennies but demands your body's limit. Flies swarm thicker now, landing on the load and your exposed skin, their wings a constant drone that drowns out the distant cries of vendors. The odors assault you, a pungent mix of fermenting vegetables, acrid urine, and metallic blood from butcher scraps, making bile rise in your throat, a survival hazard, as vomiting could weaken you further in this barely tolerable existence where dehydration from such work invites the deadly summer fevers. You pause briefly to bind a fresh cut from a jagged pot fragment with a strip torn from your hem. The cloth filthy but necessary to staunch the blood, knowing untreated wounds invite gangrene, a slow killer among labourers without access to poultices or the church's healing shrines. The lanes twist narrowly, hemmed by overhanging jetties of half-timbered houses where chamber pots are emptied from above, forcing you to dodge sudden splashes that could douse you in more filth. The ground a slippery hazard of cobbles slick with waste. Guild apprentices jeer as you pass, their youthful voices mocking your bent form, embodying the social scorn that erodes the spirit. Yet you press on, driven by the promise of wage to buy a heel of bread or a sip of ale, small mercies in the face of famine's threat after poor harvests. Sensory overload builds. The creak of wood, the squelch of mud, the burn in your lungs, but you find rhythm in the repetition, a meditative pace that soothes despite the brutality, whispering a prayer to St. Christopher for endurance. As the cart fills halfway, you wipe grime from your brow, the load's weight now a tangible burden, preparing to push onward through the throngs. You push the laden cart through the throngs of Cheapside's bustling thoroughfares, the heavy load resisting every shove as sweat mingles with the foul odors of decay rising from the refuse, straining against the weight that pulls at your weakened shoulders and back. You avoid collisions with vendors' stalls, laden with bolts of cloth and baskets of fish, their owners shouting warnings in the chaotic din of 12th century London, where one mishap could spill your cargo and invite fines or beatings from the beadles enforcing market order in this harsh feudal landscape. Your breaths come in ragged gasps, the air thick with the cart's stench, a cloying blend of rotting flesh from discarded offal and sour milk curds that clings to your clothes and skin, making passers-by wrinkle their noses and veer away. This social isolation deepens your sense of degradation amid the Plantagenet era's rigid hierarchies, where laborers like you are invisible until they err. The cart's wheels rumble over uneven cobbles, jarring your bones with each bump, the vibrations aggravating old injuries from falls or scuffles. In a time when medical care means crude splints or herbal brews affordable only to guildsmen, leaving you to endure pain that could cripple without warning. Crowds surge around you, merchants in fine hoods bartering silver pennies for spices, apprentices darting with messages, and housewives haggling over loaves, their energy contrasting your fatigue. Hunger from your scant morning bread saps your strength, risking blackout in the heat, a survival peril where the fallen are robbed or trampled. You maneuver carefully, arms burning from the effort, the coarse ropes chafing your palms into blisters that weep clear fluid, potential sites for infection in this unsanitary world, teeming with vermin and open sewers that breed typhus and dysentery among the underclass. Distant church bells chime, perhaps for a saint's feast, but you can't pause for observance, lest the overseer dock your pay, embodying the church's dual role as spiritual guide and enforcer of tithes that burden the poor. A near miss with a horse-drawn wagon forces you to yank the cart aside, heart pounding from the close call that could crush limbs, leaving you maimed and unable to work. A fate worse than death in an age without almshouses, where the disabled beg until they perish from exposure. Yet, amid the brutality, you cling to resilience, focusing on the rhythm of your steps, the squelch of mud, the creak of axles, a soothing cadence that tempers the ordeal. Sweat soaks your tunic, cooling in the breeze off the Thames, carrying hints of river muck as you navigate toward the dump site, the throngs parting reluctantly. Pushing onward, you feel the day's toll accumulating, but the promise of coin drives you, a fragile thread in the web of barely survivable existence. You take a momentary break in a quieter side street off Cheapside, the narrow passage shadowed by leaning timber-framed buildings that block the midday sun, allowing you to slump against a rough stone wall slick with moss as you wipe the encrusted filth from your brow with the back of your hand. The grime smears across your sweat-streaked face in this brief respite from the grueling labor of hauling refuse through medieval London's unforgiving thoroughfares. Your chest heaves with labored breaths, the air here slightly less choked than near the cart, though still laced with the underlying rot of nearby privies and the faint tang of urine-soaked earth. This is a constant in the high Middle Ages, where waste flows freely into streets, breeding the miasmas believed to carry deadly agues and fevers that ravage the poor without mercy. The splinter in your finger throbs sharply, a jagged piece of wood from the cart's handle embedded deep, drawing a trickle of blood that mixes with dirt, and you hastily bind it with a ragged strip torn from your cloak's hem. The coarse fabric is rough against the wound, and you know full well that without herbal remedies like yarrow poultices or a healer's lancing, luxuries reserved for those with coin, such injuries often fester into pus-filled swellings, leading to amputation or death by poison in the blood, a fate you've witnessed among fellow vagrants. Exhaustion weighs on you like a millstone, your muscles quivering from the morning's exertions. malnourished frame barely sustaining the effort in Henry II's England, where famines follow bad harvests and the feudal lords hoard grain, leaving the destitute to weaken and succumb to the cold or opportunistic illnesses like the bloody flux. The side street offers faint sounds. The drip of water from a leaking eave, the distant murmur of a peddler's cry, providing a rhythmic calm amid the brutality, but vigilance remains. You scan for lurking cutpurses who prey on weary labourers, their daggers quick in the shadows of this lawless underbelly, enforced only sporadically by sheriffs and their posses. A rat scurries past, bold in daylight, its beady eyes a reminder of the vermin that carry bites leading to lockjaw, or worse, with no access to the church's miraculous relics for the likes of you. Yet, in this pause, you muster dignity, straightening slightly to invoke Saint Roch, protector against plagues, whispering for strength to continue, aware that halting too long risks the overseer's wrath and docked pay, plunging you deeper into starvation's grip. The bound finger aches dully now, a minor victory, and you rise unsteadily, the wall's texture imprinting on your palm, preparing to return to the cart, the break a fragile island in the sea of survival's harsh demands. You complete the haul by dumping the refuse near the Thames's edge, the cart's wheels sinking into the soft, muddy banks where the river's sluggish flow laps lazily at the shore, carrying away floating scraps of waste in its brown, turbid waters as you tip the load with a final heave. The debris tumbles out in a foul cascade that splatters your legs with muck, leaving you to emerge covered head to toe in the clinging grime of decay while clutching your meager earnings, a handful of farthings and a bent penny in your soiled fist, all the while evading the envious eyes of loitering scavengers who hover like vultures in this desolate dumping ground on the fringes of 12th century London. The river's scent overwhelms, a heavy brew of fish guts, sewage and algae blooming in the warmth. The air humming with flies that swarm the fresh pile, landing on your exposed skin and forcing you to swat them away. Their bites raise welts that itch fiercely, potential vectors for the skin eruptions and fevers that claim lives among the unclean in an era before understanding of humours or proper sanitation, where bathing is rare for the poor and leads to chills in unheated hovels. Your body trembles from the exertion, back screaming in protest from the repeated lifts, a risk of lasting damage like twisted spines common among labourers under the feudal yoke, with no respite houses or guilds to aid vagrants like you, run away from a lord's manor and thus marked for recapture and branding. The Thames gurgles softly, its rhythm a deceptive calm against the brutality, as boats laden with wool for export pass by, their crews casting disdainful glances at your filthy form. This embodies the social chasm where merchants thrive on trade routes while you scrape for survival, the coins in your hand hard-won but scant, perhaps enough for a meagre pottage, but not to stave off winter's starvation when the river freezes and work dries up. Envious eyes track you, ragged figures rummaging nearby, their desperation mirroring yours, prompting you to slip the earnings into a hidden fold of your tunic, mindful of robberies that leave victims beaten or dead in the mud, with justice swift only for the propertied under Henry II's common law. A gull cries overhead, wheeling in the grey sky, and you straighten wearily, the muck cracking on your skin as it dries, a sensory prison that chafes with every move. Whispering a thanks to the Virgin for completing the task without mishap, you turn from the river, the dump's chaos behind you, evading a grasping hand from a shadow dweller with a sidestep, the encounter heightening your pulse in this barely survivable world of constant threats. You make your way to a modest stall in the bustling market of Billingsgate, the fishy odours intensifying as you approach the riverside wharves where boats unload their catches. You barter your hard-earned coins, a few farthings glinting dully in your palm, for a handful of withered turnips pulled from a burlap sack and salted fish scraps wrapped in greasy cloth, feeling the stallholder's reluctance manifest in his narrowed eyes and hesitant grasp as you present your soiled hands, caked with the day's refuse that leaves dark smears on the produce in this harsh exchange amid medieval London's teeming commerce. The stallholder, a weathered man in a stained apron, haggles gruffly, threepence for that lot no less, his voice competing with the cries of gulls and fishermen auctioning herring at pennies per dozen. This forces you to counter with your paltry sum. The negotiation, a tense dance where desperation meets greed in Henry II's economy, driven by royal taxes and guild monopolies that inflate prices for the poor, risking hunger if you overpay. Your hands tremble slightly from fatigue, the grime underscoring your lowly status, prompting his sneer, "Wash yourself, beggar, ye stink of the midden," a verbal lash that stings, but you endure stoically, dignity intact as you insist on the deal. You're aware that refusal means foraging in dumps again, exposing you to the poisonous vapors and sharp hazards that invite tetanus, or worse in an age of crude medicine like bloodletting, unaffordable without coin. The turnips feel leathery and shrunken in your grasp, victims of a dry summer that hints at coming famine, their earthy scent a faint promise of sustenance. The fish scraps, heads and tails salted to preserve, carry a briny tang that waters your mouth, though oversalting could parch you further without fresh water from the conduits, often tainted and leading to gut-wrenching cramps. Market sounds envelop you. The slap of fish on slabs, the jingle of scales weighing silver, the lowing of driven livestock, a sensory barrage that overwhelms but orients you in the survival game. Bartering skills honed from necessity secure these scraps, barely enough to fuel your weakened body against the scurvy from vitamin lack or the wasting from chronic undernourishment. The stallholder relents finally, snatching your coins with a grunt, his reluctance born of fear you'll taint his wares, a common prejudice in this stratified society where the destitute are shunned as plague bringers, even as the church preaches charity during Vespers. Clutching your purchases, you retreat from the stall, the weight a small triumph amid brutality, scanning for thieves in the crowd, the exchange complete, but the day's perils far from over. You retreat to an archway beneath a tavern in the bustling heart of Billingsgate, the stone curve providing meager shelter from the prying eyes of the market as you huddle with your paltry meal clutched in grimy hands. The withered turnip's earthy bite crunches dryly between your teeth, offering scant comfort against the hollow ache of chronic hunger that weakens your limbs and clouds your thoughts in this relentless struggle for survival amid 12th century London's feudal squalor. The salted fish scraps follow, their briny, flaky texture clinging to your parched tongue, a meager portion that barely dulls the gnawing pain in your gut. This reminds you of the famines that have swept the land under Henry II's reign, where poor yields leave the destitute scavenging for roots and offal, while lords feast on venison and wine in distant manors. The archway's damp walls, etched with years of soot from the tavern's hearth, press coolly against your back through your rags, the space echoing with the muffled roar of hawkers outside, fresh eels, a penny a pound, and the rhythmic clang of a nearby blacksmith's hammer forging horseshoes or plowshares. These sounds underscore the industry's hum you once fled as a serf bound to endless toil. Exhaustion from the morning's refuse haul lingers, your muscles sore and trembling, sweat-dried filth cracking on your skin like a second abrasive layer, harboring lice that bite incessantly and invite the scratching that opens sores prone to infection. In this era of open wounds and no salves for the penniless, a simple cut can lead to feverish delirium and death without the intervention of a costly leech or herbalist. The meal's flavors mingle poorly, the turnip's bitterness amplified by the fish's salt, risking thirst in a city where clean water is guarded by conduits and often fouled by upstream waste, leading to the bloody fluxes that twist bowels and claim lives in overcrowded wards. Yet, in this hidden nook, you savor slowly, stretching the food to mimic fullness, a survival tactic honed against the brutality where overeating on scarcity brings cramps, and undereating invites the wasting disease that hollows cheeks and bends spines. Distant church bells toll, perhaps signaling a procession for a local saint, but you can't join, lest you expose yourself to alms seekers or beadles hunting idlers for forced labor on the city's walls. The archway drips with condensation, a rhythmic patter that soothes faintly, countering the inner turmoil of barely enduring as you ponder the fragility of life in Plantagenet England, where one bad day could tip you into the grave pits dug for the unnamed poor. Finishing the last scrap, you wipe your mouth with a sleeve, the taste lingering as a hollow victory, ready to face the afternoon's perils anew. You encounter a frail child beggar huddled in the shadows near the tavern archway, his small frame racked by persistent coughs that echo wetly in the narrow passage. This draws you to offer a share of your remaining food, a sliver of salted fish and a bitten turnip, in a fleeting gesture of solidarity that pierces the isolation of your own desperate existence, while pondering your susceptibility to the same rampant fevers that sweep through the overcrowded quarters of medieval London, where close-packed humanity breeds contagion like flies on refuse. The child's eyes, wide and hollow from malnutrition, meet yours with a mix of gratitude and wariness, his ragged smock hanging loosely on bony shoulders, scarred by poxmarks. This is a common affliction in Henry II's era, when variolation is unknown, and epidemics from returning crusaders introduced new plagues to the unsuspecting poor, leaving orphans to fend alone without kin or guild support. You extend the food carefully, your grimy fingers brushing his chilled ones. The contact, a rare human connection in this brutal world, stratified by feudal bonds. Children like him, perhaps abandoned after a parent's death from overwork or the king's wars, face starvation or impressment into beggars' gangs that exploit the vulnerable for alms. His coughs rattle deeply, phlegm-flecked and ominous, signaling the consumption or lung rot that claims young lives in damp hovels without fire or nourishing broth. These diseases are exacerbated by the city's foul air, thick with smoke from tanneries, and the miasmas rising from open sewers that carry cholera and typhus. Sharing diminishes your own scant reserves, heightening the risk of your body's collapse from undernourishment, where weakened defenses invite the same coughs to settle in your chest, leading to bloody sputum and a slow, wheezing end in the streets, unattended by physicians who demand silver for their services. Yet, dignity urges the act, a small defiance against the indifference of lords and church officials who preach charity but hoard wealth, leaving the destitute to mutual aid in shadows. The child nibbles gratefully, the fish's salt bringing a faint smile amid his pallor, while you reflect on your own vulnerabilities. Exposure to the morning's filth increasing chances of ague, with no access to willow bark teas or monastic infirmaries reserved for the pious elite. Market clamor filters in, the hawk of a pie seller, the rumble of carts providing a rhythmic backdrop to this moment, soothing yet underscoring the transience as rain begins to patter lightly overhead. The gesture complete, you nod farewell. The child's thanks, a whisper lost in his next cough, leaving you to move on. The encounter a stark reminder of shared fragility in this barely survivable tapestry of poverty and peril. You seek cover from a sudden rain shower that darkens the skies over Billingsgate, dashing under a leaking eave of a half-timbered warehouse where water cascades in erratic streams from the thatched roof. The water mixes with the gutter runoff that carries street filth and animal droppings into swirling puddles at your feet, amplifying your vigilance against the penetrating chills that could invite the deadly agues and shivering fits so prevalent among the exposed poor in 12th century London's unpredictable climate. The rain patters steadily, a cold veil that soaks your threadbare cloak almost instantly, the wool heavy and clinging like a sodden weight on your shoulders. This draws heat from your body already depleted by the day's labors and meager meal, risking the onset of the bone-deep cold that leads to pneumonia or the flux in an era where warmth is a privilege of hearths in manorial halls, not the streets patrolled by beadles under Henry II's watchful sheriffs. Water drips from the eave onto your hood, trickling down your neck in icy rivulets that raise gooseflesh, the sensation heightened by the wind whistling through the narrow alleys, carrying the briny scent of the nearby Thames mingled with the acrid tang of wet refuse, a brew that clogs your nostrils and threatens nausea. You press against the warehouse wall, its rough plaster flaking under your palms, scanning the downpour for any break while mindful of the runoff's hazards. The water is polluted with chamber pot empties and market waste. It could splash wounds or be ingested accidentally, inviting the gut-wrenching dysentery that twists innards and dehydrates the afflicted to skeletal husks without clean ale or herbal infusions, affordable only to guildsmen. The shower intensifies, thunder rumbling distantly like the king's artillery in far-off sieges, forcing you to curl tighter, joints aching from the damp that seeps into old injuries. This is a survival threat in Plantagenet England, where rheumatism cripples beggars, rendering them immobile and prey to starvation or charitable death in unmarked graves. Yet, in this forced pause, the rain's rhythm offers a meditative hush amid the brutality, drowning out the market's din and allowing reflection on the day's toll, filth-embedded skin prone to boils, hunger's edge blunted but persistent. Church bells toll faintly through the deluge, perhaps calling for shelter in sacred spaces, but you dare not, lest you be turned away as unclean or accused of loitering. Vigilance peaks as shadows move in the rain, potential thieves exploiting the weather, and you clutch your empty pouch, the chill deepening, urging endurance until the shower eases, a fragile balance in the unrelenting fight to outlast the elements. You resume your begging in the afternoon near Smithfield's livestock pens, the vast open field on London's northern edge, alive with the lowing of cattle and the bleats of sheep driven from rural manors. You position yourself along the muddy paths trampled by hooves, appealing to butchers in blood-stained aprons and drovers with weathered staffs through hoarse tales of woe. Spare a crust for a soul fled from bondage, good sirs, while sidestepping their brusque rejections that come as grunts or shoves. The air is thick with the metallic scent of fresh blood, mingling with the pungent manure that squelches underfoot in this brutal hub of medieval trade under Henry II's England. The pens stretch out, wooden enclosures groaning under the press of beasts destined for slaughter, their hides matted with mud from long journeys, mirroring your own filth-encrusted form after the rain's dousing. The rain has left your cloak heavy and chill-inducing, heightening the risk of the agues that settle in damp lungs and lead to hacking deaths among the exposed poor, without access to warming possets or monastic care. Butchers wield cleavers with rhythmic thuds, carving haunches that drip crimson onto the ground. The sights and sounds a sensory assault, the sizzle of fat on portable braziers, the crack of whips urging animals that overwhelms but orients you in the survival dance. A kind drover might toss a scrap of offal, though most dismiss you as a nuisance, embodying the feudal disdain for vagrants who disrupt the flow of commerce taxed heavily by the crown to fund wars in Anjou or Ireland. Your voice cracks from thirst, Stories of lost kin or harsh lords exaggerated for pity, but rejections sting like lashes, eroding spirit in a world where the weak are culled by indifference. This leaves you to dodge a swinging staff that could crack ribs, untreatable without costly splints and prone to infection in this era of barber surgeons who bleed patients for humours. Manure's earthy reek clings to your nostrils, flies buzzing in swarms drawn to the warmth, their bites adding to the welts that fester without salves, a constant peril in Plantagenet, times when pestilence spreads from animal to man. Yet, resilience flickers, you persist, scanning faces for mercy, the afternoon sun casting long shadows over the pens, warming slightly, but promising evening's cold that kills the unprepared. A rare coin, a farthing, lands in your palm from a sympathetic soul, a minor triumph amid brutality, clutched tightly against thieves lurking in the crowds. The livestock's clamour provides a steady rhythm, soothing in its familiarity as you move along the pens, evading a stampede of pigs that could trample you into the mud, the day's hardships compounding in this barely survivable existence. You rummage through a heap of market discards piled haphazardly near the edge of Smithfield's pens. The mound, a chaotic jumble of bruised fruits, wilted greens, and trampled husks, discarded by vendors at day's end. You salvage a softened pear, with yielding flesh under your probing fingers, and a handful of edible herbs like wild mint and sorrel, their musty smells of rot blending with faint freshness that you inhale cautiously, while checking each item for signs of spoilage. Black spots or wriggling maggots that could invite the violent retching and fluxes so deadly to the undernourished in 12th century London's unforgiving underbelly. The heap's textures vary, slimy peels slipping through your grasp, fibrous stems crunching softly, the ground beneath soft and yielding from absorbed juices, sucking at your shoes like the mires of rural fens you once toiled in as a serf. This is now a distant memory, overshadowed by urban perils, where scavenging risks confrontation with watchmen enforcing anti-vagrancy assizes under Henry II, who could accuse you of theft and mete out floggings or the stocks, public humiliations that expose one to thrown refuse and further disease. The pear's skin gives way with a gentle pop, its overripe juice trickling sticky down your chin as you bite in, the sweet tart flavor a rare delight amid chronic blandness. Though overripe fruit often harbors the molds leading to gut cramps, or the bloody stool of dysentery, untreated without emetics, or the church's blessed waters, affordable only to the devout with means. Herbs provide a peppery bite, chewed slowly to extract nutrients against scurvy's gum-bleeding scourge. But you inspect warily for poisonous lookalikes like hemlock, a fatal mistake in this era of folk knowledge passed orally among the poor, without herbals or apothecaries for verification. Market sounds fade slightly here on the periphery, the distant bellows of auctioneers selling beasts by the pound, the creak of carts hauling away hides, allowing a rhythmic focus on your task, the rummaging a meditative sift through layers, hands blackened further by soil and decay. Flies hover insistently, drawn to the rot, their drone a constant hum that masks approaching footsteps, heightening vigilance against rivals who might claim the pile with fists or knives, leaving gashes prone to gangrene in unsanitary conditions. Yet, in this act, dignity emerges. Salvaging sustains without begging's humiliation, a small assertion in feudal brutality where lords control harvests and the crown taxes bread. Finishing your finds, you tuck extras into your tunic's folds, the sense lingering as a hollow comfort, ready to press on as the afternoon wanes. You confront an aggressive competitor over a prime begging location near a bustling gate into Smithfield, his burly form and scarred face advancing with menacing growls as he claims the spot with shoved shoulders and spat curses. The dispute escalates to shouts that echo off the wooden fences. "This turf's mine by right of strength, cur," drawing the unwelcome notice of nearby watchmen in their hooded cloaks and armed with staves, compelling you to flee into the labyrinth of twisting alleys that snake away from the market, your heart pounding from the near violence in this raw edge of survival amid 12th century London's feudal tensions. The competitor's breath reeks of sour ale, his fists clenched like hammers, a reminder of the street codes where might trumps all among the destitute, leading to brawls that crack bones or spill blood. These wounds fester without poultices in an age where barber surgeons demand payment up front, leaving the injured to writhe in agony or succumb to fever in hidden corners. Your shouts rise in defense, voice raw from the day's pleas, but escalation risks arrest under Henry II's common law, where disturbances earn the pillory's clamp or a lashing that tears flesh, exposing it to infections like erysipelas that swell limbs to bursting. Watchman's calls, "Halt, you rabble!" Spur your retreat, feet slipping on manure, slick cobbles as you dart into the alleys, narrow passages hemmed by overhanging jetties where shadows conceal, but also harbour thieves waiting to pounce on the distracted, their daggers quick for a farthing or scrap. The labyrinth twists confusingly, walls of wattle and daub pressing close, the air cooler and mustier with hints of baking from hidden ovens. This is a sensory shift from the pen's chaos that allows your pulse to slow, though pursuit's threat lingers, beadles empowered to chase vagrants for the sheriff's courts, potentially leading to branding as a runaway serf and return to manorial drudgery or the gallows for repeat offences. Adrenaline fades, leaving tremors in your limbs, the confrontation, a drain on scant energy reserves, heightening hunger's bite and vulnerability to the chills that invite pneumonia in damp confines. Yet, evasion preserves freedom, a Pyrrhic win in brutality's game, where alliances are fleeting and trust rare among the desperate. Alley sounds emerge, the drip of eaves, a child's distant cry, providing a rhythmic hush as you navigate deeper, scanning for safe egress. The flight, a stark emblem of the constant peril where one clash could end in maiming or death, untended in unmarked pauper graves. You nurse a bruised arm from an earlier tumble while pushing the laden cart through Cheapside's ruts, the impact jarring your elbow against the wooden side with a sharp pain that now throbs steadily like a blacksmith's hammer. You wrap it gingerly with a scavenged strip of cloth torn from a discarded rag found in the alleys, leaning against a cold stone wall etched with years of grime and graffiti in the dimming light of afternoon, invoking Saroch, the patron against plagues and bodily afflictions, with a whispered prayer for safeguard against the infectious horrors that claim so many like you in the teeming squalor of 12th century London. The bruise swells under your probing fingers, purple hues blooming beneath the skin, a common injury from the hazards of refuse hauling, where uneven cobbles trip the unwary, leading to falls that crack bones or tear ligaments. These injuries are untreatable without the costly interventions of a bone setter or herbal compresses reserved for those with silver pennies, leaving the poor to endure chronic pain that cripples over time in Henry II's feudal realm. The cloth, rough and frayed with hints of old bloodstains, binds tightly to compress the swelling, but its filth risks introducing the very plagues you beseech protection from, bubonic swells or erysipelas that redden flesh and burn with fever. These spread from rat bites or open wounds in an era where miasmas are blamed and quarantine unknown, decimating hovels and leaving corpses for the death carts. Leaning against the wall, its uneven texture pressing into your back through damp rags, you feel the chill seep in, amplifying the ache. A survival threat as cold aggravates bruises into stiffness, hindering future labor and begging that sustain you against starvation's slow grip. Alley sounds filter softly, the coo of pigeons roosting overhead, the distant toll of a bell for nons, providing a rhythmic pause amid brutality, allowing reflection on the plagues whispered from crusader tales, where whole villages empty from black boils and bloody coughs. Though the great death lurks in the future, for now, it's the everyday agues and pox that fell kin and comrades. Invoking Saint Roch, you trace a cross on your forehead with a grimy finger, seeking divine mercy in a world where the Church offers relics for the faithful, but turns away the destitute as unclean burdens. The binding complete, pain dulled to a persistent throb, you straighten wearily, aware that neglect could lead to useless limbs and begging from a cart, a fate of utter dependency in Plantagenet England's unforgiving streets, where the maimed perish from exposure or indifference. Pushing off the wall, you continue, the injury a stark emblem of the fragile balance in this barely survivable existence. You drift toward the Thames's banks as dusk nears, the sky deepening to hues of bruised purple over London's sprawling wards, weaving through waning crowds of fishmongers, packing their stalls, and apprentices, shuttering shops. You search for overlooked flotsam or fishbones washed ashore, along the muddy shores where the river's sluggish current deposits debris from upstream barges and city waste, the water's gentle lap against the silt offering a rare serene note amid the exhausting toll of your day in this harsh medieval tapestry under Henry II's rule. The banks stretch muddily, pocked with reeds and scattered timbers from wrecked vessels, your feet sinking into the soft, sucking earth that clings like treacle, chilling your toes through worn soles and risking the foot rot that swells digits and leads to amputation, without salves or the rare mercy of a charitable friar. This peril is amplified by the river's tainted waters, carrying cholera from emptied privies. Dusk's light fades, casting long shadows from the bridge's arches, the air cooling with a misty breath off the Thames that carries the brackish scent of salt from the estuary mixed with decaying weeds. This is a sensory shift from the day's urban clamor to this liminal edge where survival demands keen eyes for salvage, perhaps a lost net fragment for mending rags or edible mussels clinging to pilings, though fouled ones invite the gut-twisting fluxes that dehydrate to death in hours. You scan the shoreline methodically, bending to prod at heaps of driftwood and kelp, the textures slimy and coarse under your fingers, whispering a prayer to St. Christopher for guidance in foraging. You're aware that twilight invites dangers like river thieves, or the king's water bailiffs patrolling for poachers, who could seize you for trespass and flog you under common law, leaving stripes that fester in the damp. The lap of water rhythms softly, a soothing counterpoint to your fatigue, waves lulling like a distant lullaby amid brutality, allowing brief respite as you unearth a few fish spines, their bony remnants crunchable for meager calcium against the rickets that bow legs in malnourished frames. Yet, vigilance persists. A splash could signal otters, or worse, lurking cutpurses using the gloom for ambush, daggers drawn for your scant possessions. The river's murmur eases aching joints, a fragile peace in Plantagenet times, where the Thames sustains trade, but drowns the careless in its currents, swollen from rains. Pocketing your finds, you linger momentarily. The serenity a balm before night's full descent and its heightened perils of cold and predators. You join a cluster of beggars around a smouldering fire in a derelict yard tucked behind crumbling warehouses near the Thames, the flickering flames casting wavering shadows on the weathered faces of your fellow destitute as you settle on a makeshift seat of stacked crates. You trade survival lore in hushed tones. Watch the beadles at Ludgate. They've a new sheriff with a heavy hand, while the warmth seeps into your chilled bones and eases the throbbing aches in your joints from the day's relentless toils, the night sky above beginning to unveil its twinkling stars through the thinning mist of 12th century London. The yard, overgrown with nettles that sting if brushed and littered with broken pottery shards, sharp enough to gash unwary feet, offers precarious shelter in Henry II's England. Such gatherings risk dispersal by night, watchmen enforcing curfews with clubs that bruise ribs and crack skulls, leaving the injured to bleed out or succumb to internal ruptures without surgical aid, a fate common among the vagrants who share these hidden refuges. The fire's crackle provides a rhythmic heartbeat, its smoke acrid with burning damp wood scavenged from the banks, stinging eyes but warding off the evening chill that invites the pneumonia ravaging lungs in unheated nights. Diseases spread through close huddles like this, where coughs echo and phlegm is spat into the flames. Lore exchanges flow, tips on safer begging spots near churches during feasts, warnings of plague signs like swollen glands, remedies like chewing willow bark for pains, knowledge passed orally in the absence of manuscripts or healers for the illiterate poor, a collective wisdom against feudal brutality where lords demand labor and the crown taxes alms. Warmth radiates, thawing numb fingers and soothing the bruise on your arm. A small mercy amid exhaustion, though flames must be kept low to avoid drawing patrols or rival gangs who raid for scraps, leading to knife fights that spill guts and invite tetanus from rusted blades. Stars emerge, pinpricks in the velvet sky, invoking tales of astrological portents for better days, a hopeful whisper against the despair of chronic hunger that hollows bellies and weakens resolve. The group's scents mingle, unwashed bodies, river mud, herbal pouches for warding evil, a sensory cocoon that fosters fragile bonds. Though trust is thin, a newcomer might be a spy for the bailiffs. As conversations lull, the fire's glow dims, embers pulsing like breaths, easing you toward rest in this barely survivable world. The yard's enclosure, a temporary haven before dawn's demands. You dodge a patrol of night watchmen, upholding the strict curfew imposed across London's wards, their lanterns swinging like pendulums in the gloom as they tramp along the cobbled streets with staves at the ready. This forces you to melt swiftly into the enveloping shadows of a narrow alley where the pale moonlight filters through overhanging eaves, illuminating the timber-framed buildings, etched with years of grime and soot from countless hearth fires in this vigilant underbelly of 12th century England under Henry II's law. The watchmen's voices carry lowly, gruff commands to clear the ways or face the stocks, echoing off the walls, a reminder of the feudal order where night wanderers like you, vagrants without hearth or hall, are deemed suspects. You're liable to arrest and the brutal punishments of flogging or confinement in dank cells where dampness breeds the joint-swelling rheumatism or the feverish agues that waste away the imprisoned without trial or mercy. Your heart quickens subtly, breaths shallow to avoid detection as you press against a rough plaster wall, its flaky texture scraping your palms through the chill air thick with the night's mist rising from the Thames, carrying whispers of river rot that clings to your nostrils. Moonlight casts eerie patterns on the buildings, highlighting cracks in the daub where rats scurry audibly, their claws a faint scratch against the silence, harbingers of the bites that introduce lockjaw's rigid spasms, fatal without the rare antidotes known only to learned physicians serving the elite. Dodging requires agility honed from survival, your bruised arm throbbing with each careful step over uneven ground, littered with unseen debris that could twist ankles, leading to lameness and begging from the ground, in an era where the crippled are left to starve or freeze in winter's grip. The patrol passes, boots fading into the distance, their lanterns glow receding like dying embers, allowing tension to ease slightly, though vigilance lingers against opportunistic thieves who prowl the dark, daggers drawn for a scrap of cloth or hidden coin. The shadows provide cover, a double-edged sanctuary in Plantagenet times, where curfew enforces the king's peace but traps the destitute in peril, exposed to the elements that chill bones and invite pneumonia's wet coughs. Moon's silver light softens the grime, a rhythmic glow pulsing with your slowing pulse, offering a meditative hush amid brutality as you emerge cautiously. The evasion, a narrow escape in the ceaseless fight to endure night's threats. You scout for a safe resting place in an abandoned stable courtyard hidden behind derelict warehouses near the city's edge. The overgrown space enclosed by sagging wooden fences that creak softly in the night breeze. You evaluate its defenses against lurking thieves who might slit throats for meager possessions, or stray dogs scavenging with feral growls and snapping jaws that could tear flesh and invite rabies foaming madness. All while the city's nocturnal murmurs, distant owl hoots piercing the stillness, and faint tolls of Compline bells from a nearby chapel envelop you in a veil of uneasy quiet in this vulnerable hour of 12th century London. The courtyard's ground is uneven, strewn with mouldy hay bales and rusted iron scraps sharp enough to puncture skin, leading to blood poisoning's feverish delirium, untreated in an age where barber surgeons demand payment for lancing boils, leaving the poor to suffer swelling and sepsis in hidden agony under Henry II's stratified society. You circle methodically, eyes adjusted to the moonlight filtering through broken rafters, assessing corners for windbreaks against the encroaching cold that seeps into bones like icy daggers, risking the hypothermia that claims sleepers in their rags. Bodies found stiff at dawn, without kin to mourn or bury them in consecrated ground. Owl hoots echo hauntingly, a rhythmic call that soothes, yet warns of predators, while bells toll solemnly, marking the church's call to prayer you can't heed, lest you draw attention from patrols enforcing piety and order. This could potentially lead to accusations of heresy or vagrancy, with punishments like branding that mark flesh forever. Stray dogs' distant barks heighten senses, their packs known to attack the weak for scraps, bites festering into gangrene without poultices, a survival calculus in Plantagenet England where the destitute weigh shelter against peril daily. The courtyard offers partial cover, walls blocking some wind, but vulnerabilities persist, open gates inviting intruders, damp earth breeding the worms that burrow into sores during sleep. Yet, fatigue demands rest, your body aching from labors, hunger's edge dulled but persistent, inviting dreams disturbed by nightmares of recapture by your former lord's bailiff, chaining you back to serfdom's endless toil. Murmurs blend, the rustle of leaves, a cat's yowl, creating a lulling cadence amid brutality, as you select a corner shielded by a fallen beam, the evaluation complete. A fragile choice in the unrelenting quest for a night's uneasy repose. You assemble crude bedding from scattered hay scraps and tattered old sacks, scavenged from the stable's corners, the materials damp and musty with the scent of mold and horse sweat lingering from abandoned times. You layer them meticulously in a sheltered nook against the courtyard's weathered wall to ward off the encroaching cold that bites through your thin rags like needles, the prickly fibers of the hay pressing against your fatigued form and scratching at exposed skin prone to rashes in this unsanitary haven of 12th century London's fringes. The hay crunches softly under your hands, brittle from exposure, each handful a laborious addition to the pile, your bruised arm protesting with dull throbs that echo the day's injuries. These are risks of worsening into uselessness without rest, or the herbal wraps unaffordable in Henry II's economy, where peasants barter for basics and vagrants like you rely on chance finds against winter's lethal embrace. Sacks, frayed and hole-ridden, provide a meager barrier against the ground's chill seepage, their coarse weave embedding dirt into your palms, potential carriers of lice or fleas that infest and bite relentlessly, leading to the itching plagues that swell lymph and fever bodies in close quarters without baths or laundries for the destitute. Layering demands care, hay for insulation, sacks for cover, creating a nest that cushions bones aching from malnutrition's toll, where calcium scarcity bows spines and weakens frames, inviting fractures from minor falls, untreated beyond crude splints. The nook's wall, rough timber splintered with age, offers back support, but harbors spiders whose bites inflame skin into pus-filled boils, a hazard in Plantagenet times when antivenoms are folklore and healers scarce for the penniless. Cold intensifies as night deepens, breath visible in puffs, urging haste to burrow in before shivers set in, precursors to the convulsions of exposure that kill silently, bodies discovered by morning light. Yet, in assembly, a sense of agency emerges, a small act of defiance against brutality, transforming refuse into respite amid the courtyard's murmurs, wind sighing through cracks, distant river laps. Fibers prick like reminders of hardship, but the bedding settles, a lumpy cocoon that eases pressure on weary limbs, allowing fatigue to pull at your eyelids in rhythmic waves, the preparation a bridge to slumber's fragile escape. You contemplate the day's minor triumphs, a belly filled with scavenged scraps and perils evaded like the watchman's patrol, as you recline gingerly in your makeshift bedding within the abandoned stable courtyard. The lumpy hay and sacks cradle your weary body, while the burden of endless hardship presses heavily on your spirit, like the weight of feudal chains that bind the poor to perpetual struggle in the shadowed nights of 12th century London under Henry II's unyielding rule. The triumphs feel fleeting, a softened pear's sweetness lingering on your tongue, and the warmth from the beggar's fire still faintly glowing in your limbs, yet they stand against the relentless tide of deprivation. One day's survival guarantees nothing for the morrow, hunger's spectre always lurking to weaken resolve and invite the wasting diseases that hollow frames and steal breath in sleep. Reclining deeper, the prickly hay shifts with a soft rustle, irritating skin already chafed from the day's filth, potential breeding grounds for the boils and itches that plague the unclean, untreated without salves or the church's anointed oils reserved for the tithe-paying faithful. Faint constellations glimmer overhead through gaps in the sagging roof, pinpricks of light in the velvet sky that whisper of ancient myths told around village hearths you once knew as a serf. These are now distant echoes in your vagrant life, invoking a quiet reflection on fate's cruelty, escaped manorial toil only to face urban starvation, where lords demand labor and the crown's taxes inflate bread prices beyond reach. The burden weighs, a mental millstone grinding thoughts of tomorrow's uncertainties, more refuse hauls that strain backs to breaking, rival beggars with knives drawn in alleys, or the fevers from tainted water that convulse bodies into early graves without kin to perform last rites. Yet in contemplation, a sliver of hope persists, drawn from the stars' eternal watch, perhaps portents of better fortune as astrologers claim for the elite. Though for you, it's simple endurance against brutality. The courtyard's murmurs, the sigh of wind through cracks, a distant dog's bark, provide a rhythmic backdrop, lulling the mind amid exhaustion, allowing the spirit to unclench slightly from hardship's grip. Overhead lights twinkle faintly, a celestial rhythm syncing with your slowing breaths, the triumphs anchoring you against despair's pull in this barely survivable existence, where dignity clings like dew on dawn grass. You observe a simple evening devotion in the dim seclusion of the stable courtyard, murmuring heartfelt gratitude to the Virgin Mary, patroness of the afflicted and merciful intercessor, for granting you endurance through another grueling day, even in your lowly existence as a destitute vagrant, scraping by on the fringes of medieval London's unforgiving society. The distant tolling of compline bells from a nearby priory drifts softly through the crisp night air, marking the monastic hour of final prayers before rest in this devout era under Henry II's Plantagenet throne. Kneeling slightly on the damp hay, joints creaking from the day's labors, you clasp your grimy hands in a rough approximation of piety, whispering Latin fragments learned from village sermons, Ave Maria, Gratia Plena, seeking her mantle's protection against the perils that besiege the poor. The cold freezes limbs in sleep, leading to gangrene's black rot, untreated by healers. The thieves stalk the dark for easy prey, their assaults leaving bruises or stab wounds festering into sepsis without poultices. The devotion is humble, no candle or rosary beads like those in grand cathedrals where nobles kneel on velvet, but sincere in its desperation, a spiritual anchor amid feudal brutality. The Church demands obedience and tithes, yet offers scant alms to the truly needy, leaving beggars to divine mercy for survival. Bells toll rhythmically, their bronze echoes carrying over rooftops, a soothing cadence that aligns with your murmurs, invoking Mary's compassion for the oppressed as tales recount her aid to pilgrims and the sick. Though in your reality, illness like the consumption's bloody coughs claims kin without miraculous intervention, bodies buried in unconsecrated pits. Gratitude flows for small graces, the food shared with the child beggar, the evasion of rivals, countering the weight of existence where malnutrition swells bellies with dropsy, or bows legs with rickets, ailments rampant among the underfed, without access to nourishing stews or herbal gardens controlled by lords. The air chills further, breath misting in the devotion's pores, heightening vulnerability to the agues that shiver bodies into delirium. But the ritual fortifies the spirit, a quiet defiance against despair. Bells fade into silence, their toll a lingering vibration in the night, leaving you to settle back, the observance a bridge to rest in this harsh world, where faith sustains when all else fails. You attune to the steady rhythm of falling rain on the thatched roofs surrounding the stable courtyard, the droplets pattering like gentle fingers on a drum as they cascade from eaves in silvery streams under the moonlight. You let the soothing cadence wash over your senses and ease the tension from your fatigued muscles while you curl tighter in your makeshift nest of hay and sacks, the patter blending seamlessly with your slowing breaths in this momentary haven amid the relentless hardships of 12th century London's nocturnal vale. The rain intensifies softly, a veil of mist rising from the warm earth to mingle with the courtyard's musty scents of damp wood and mold, the moisture seeping through cracks in the roof to form small puddles that reflect starlight. This amplifies the chill that threatens to penetrate your rags and invite the pneumonia's wet rasps or the rheumatic aches that twist joints into useless knots, untreated in an era where warmth is a lordly privilege and the poor endure exposure's lethal bite. Curling tighter, knees drawn to chest for conserved heat, the hay's prickles soften under pressure, a crude cocoon against the elements, though the dampness risks mildew that breeds lung-irritating spores, leading to the chronic wheezes afflicting labourers without access to expectorants or the church's blessed herbs. The rhythm captivates, pat-pat-pat on thatch, a meditative hum that drowns out distant city sounds, the creak of a shutter, a watchman's muffled call, allowing your mind to drift from the day's brutalities. The back-breaking refuse haul, the rival's threats, the gnawing hunger barely sated. Rain's melody soothes, blending with breaths that deepen and slow, a natural lullaby in Henry II's England, where storms flood streets into quagmires, drowning the unwary or spreading cholera from overflowed privies. Perils you evade by this sheltered spot. Yet attunement brings awareness of vulnerability. The roof's leaks dripping coldly on exposed skin, potential harbingers of fever if prolonged, in a time when barber surgeons bleed for imbalances, but charge coins you lack. The patter persists, rhythmic and unrelenting, easing eyelids heavier with exhaustion, the nest's textures grounding you as senses fade, a fragile piece against the survival's edge, where one night of exposure could tip into illness's abyss. Breaths synchronize with the rain, in-out pat-pat, pulling you toward slumber's embrace in this barely endurable world. You ward off intrusive thoughts of tomorrow's uncertainties, the endless cycle of begging, the risk of arrest by beadles or recapture by your former lord's men, the gnawing fear of famine or fever that could strike without warning as you focus intently on the present warmth radiating from the dying embers of the beggar's fire nearby in the derelict yard. The faint orange glow flickers softly against the encroaching darkness, allowing a fragile sense of security to settle over your weary frame, like a threadbare blanket in this precarious existence amid 12th century London's feudal shadows. The thoughts creep in like thieves in the night, visions of another day hauling refuse through mud-choked streets, muscles straining to the point of collapse, or competing with rivals whose desperation turns to violence. Knives flash in alleys leading to wounds that fester into deadly infections, without access to poultices or the mercy of a healer, paid in silver you lack. Yet you push them aside, anchoring your mind to the here and now, the subtle crackle of embers popping sporadically, the residual heat seeping into your chilled skin through the rags. This counters the damp cold that invites the agues and shivering fits that claim lives in unheated hovels during Henry II's reign, where the poor endure without hearths or fur-lined cloaks reserved for knights and merchants. The yard's enclosure, with its sagging fences and overgrown weeds rustling faintly in the breeze, offers illusory protection, but in this moment it suffices. This is a rare pause from the brutality where survival hinges on vigilance against stray dogs' bites, carrying rabies madness, or opportunistic cut-purses slitting throats for a crust. Embers dim gradually, their warmth a fleeting comfort against the bone-deep fatigue from malnutrition's toll, where meager scraps fail to rebuild strength, leaving you vulnerable to the wasting that thins blood and weakens hearts. Focusing sharpens senses to the present, the earthy scent of damp soil mingling with smoke, the distant hoot of an owl syncing with your breaths, a meditative rhythm that soothes the spirit, warding off despair's clutch amid Plantagenet England's harsh hierarchies, where serfs like you flee only to find urban perils equally unforgiving. Security settles tentatively, a fragile veil over uncertainties, allowing eyelids to droop heavier. The warding, a mental shield in this barely survivable world, where one day's end is no promise of dawn's mercy. You feel the exhaustion of the day's labors pull you inexorably toward slumber. The accumulated weight of hauling refuse through crowded lanes, scavenging discards amid rot, and evading confrontations with rivals and patrols, now manifesting as a profound heaviness in your limbs and a fog clouding your thoughts. The distant sounds of the city, muffled cartwheels rumbling over cobbles, a watchman's faint call echoing through wards, and the occasional bark of a hound, fade gradually into a comforting haze that blurs the edges of awareness, your eyelids growing irresistibly heavy with the weariness of a body pushed to its limits in the unrelenting grind of 12th century London's feudal underclass. The pull is visceral, muscles aching from strains that could tear if overtaxed again without respite, a risk of permanent lameness or collapse in Henry II's era, where labourers endure without Sabbaths or nourishing meals. They rely on stale bread and salted scraps that stave off starvation, but invite scurvy's bleeding gums and dropsy's swollen limbs. Exhaustion deepens, breaths slowing to match the haze's rhythm, the city's nocturnal symphony dimming like a receding tide. The clang of a shutter closing far off, the whisper of wind through stable cracks, creating a sensory cocoon that eases the mind from brutality's grasp. Each day battles disease from filthy waters causing dysentery's cramps or injuries, from falls leading to gangrene's black decay, untreated beyond crude bindings. Eyelids flutter, heavy as lead weights forged in smithies you pass daily, the haze comforting in its numbness, dulling the throb of your bruised arm and the itch of lice-infested skin. Perils of the destitute, without baths or laundries, breeding rashes that swell into boils festering with pus. Yet, in this yielding, a subtle peace emerges, the labour's toll demanding surrender amid Plantagenet hardships, where serfs toil under whips and vagrants like you navigate urban dangers, thieves' ambushes or winter's freeze that stiffens corpses in alleys. Sounds blend into indistinction, a hazy murmur lulling deeper, weariness overwhelming like a river's current, pulling you under as awareness frays. The exhaustion, a gateway to oblivion in this harsh world, where rest is a stolen luxury against tomorrow's uncertainties. You drift into rest at last, nestled securely in the dim courtyard's makeshift nest of hay and sacks that cradle your battered form against the cold ground, dreaming faintly of a kind of fate where abundance replaces scarcity and peace supplants peril. The medieval night envelops London in a quiet repose broken only by the soft patter of lingering rain and the distant toll of a bell, marking the passage of hours in this era of unyielding hardship. As slumber claims you, reflections surface on how you survived this day, through sheer tenacity in scavenging meagre sustenance from market heaps, evading the beadles' clubs and rivals' threats with cunning honed by necessity, and finding fleeting solidarity among fellow beggars around a smouldering fire. All this amid the brutal realities of 12th century life under Henry II, where feudal bonds chain the poor to endless toil. Famines ravage after poor harvests, leaving bodies starved and skeletal. Diseases like agues and fluxes spread unchecked in filthy streets without remedies for the destitute. Violence lurks in every shadow, from thieves or enforcers, meting out floggings and brandings that scar flesh and spirit alike. A time when survival is a razor-thin edge balanced against exposure's lethal chill, malnutrition's slow erosion, and society's indifference that views the lowly as expendable burdens. The harshness weighs in dreams, a tapestry of suffering where knights clash in distant wars funded by taxes, squeezing the peasantry, and the church preaches resignation while hoarding wealth, leaving you to endure with whispered prayers to saints who seem distant in their mercy. Yet, as consciousness fades, an enlightened wisdom emerges, transcending the era's grim veil. In the forge of adversity, true resilience is forged, not merely in enduring the storm, but in recognizing that every soul, high or low, navigates an inner feudal realm of fears and desires. Liberation comes from cultivating compassion within, for it is in sharing scraps with a child, or finding solace in stars, that one glimpses the eternal truth, that life's hierarchies are illusions, and the greatest power lies in the quiet dignity of the human spirit, unbound by chains of gold or iron. As the rain's gentle patter fades into the quiet embrace of night, and your weary body finally surrenders to sleep in that dim, forgotten courtyard, you've endured the unyielding brutality of a day as London's lowliest, a refuse collector scavenging scraps from filth-choked streets, evading rivals' fists and the beadles' staves, all while hunger clawed at your insides and disease whispered threats in every puddle. Well done, survivor. You've clung to life where so many falter, proving that even at society's bottom, the spark of resilience burns on. But as dreams carry you away, whispers of tomorrow stir. Perhaps a precarious rise to the sweltering drudgery of a scullion in the royal kitchens at Westminster Palace. There, endless hours scrubbing grease-caked pots amid scalding steam and tyrannical cooks demand unflinching obedience. The meager wage barely stretching to feed a family, while burns, exhaustion, and the constant threat of dismissal from a whim of the king's household loom like shadows over your fragile stability. Rest now, but stay tuned for the next chapter in Surviving the Feudal Age, where the illusions of security and service to power reveal their own cruel chains. If you dare to awaken. Sweet dreams, subscribe, and hit the bell to join the ascent. Congratulations, exalted noble.